All right, everybody, welcome back. Good morning to you guys. Hope you're doing really well. Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy. Hopefully, you guys are having a good morning so far. It's April the 20th, 2020. This is for 9 to 9:50 a.m. at Chapman University. So welcome back, guys. I'll be right with you guys getting started in about 5 minutes. So this is a little downtime before the class hour starts. Good morning, Marissa. Hey there. Good to see you guys this AM. Cool. Good morning. Anybody else that's here in the live stream, feel free to just say hello. It's always good to hear from you guys in these strange times, I guess. Anybody watching the Michael Jordan documentary? I don't know. Probably a few of you maybe, if you're fans of the sport. I know it's a big viewing event for all us stuck at home, so I was watching that yesterday myself, actually, last night. Interesting stuff. Hey, Hugh. Good to see you there. All right, just a few more minutes and we'll get rolling here. Am I a sports fan? Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a few sports that I'm a big fan of. Basketball, tennis are top of the list pretty much. I played tennis in high school for a little while, but I could not keep up with the commitments. So very short-lived experience, but I was a pretty good tennis player. I still play a little bit when I can. Basketball, I love. Played a lot growing up, and then always been a fan of the league. I'm old enough to remember the days of Michael Jordan, but I like LeBron James maybe just as much. So yeah, I really miss sports in this new normal. I didn't really realize how much I actually liked it until it's been taken away. So yeah, looking forward to the resumption of some type of entertainment up there. Maybe they'll be able to find a way to continue the NBA season. I'm a fan of the Lakers, fan of LeBron, so I feel kind of robbed because of the fact that he was clearly, in my view, heading towards MVP and bringing the title home to LA. So maybe it wasn't meant to be, but we'll see. See if they find a way to get it going again. Okay. One more thing. All right, guys, we're just about ready to start. I'm pulling up one little document here on my phone so that we can talk about the prompts, basically. Okay. Okay, everybody. Well, welcome back to class. Good morning, Ella, Marissa, everyone else that's here. Good to see you guys. So, a couple of quick things to get started with. Maybe a few of you guys have noticed a message that I delivered through Blackboard. Can anybody just confirm? Just making sure that it's there. I sent this message yesterday, and it's basically got an attached file with the prompt for the 3 prompts for the second essay that's coming up. So I figured I'd start off by quickly going over the document, telling you guys about the second essay. Does that sound familiar? Anybody? The prompts, making sure I don't have any issues on your end with getting it. You'll find it in your inbox, delivered to the class as a Blackboard announcement. Did anybody notice that? Just a quick confirmation. I'm just looking to see. Okay, good. So Cameron, if you got it, everybody got it because it was a mass mailing. But one thing to notice about it, the due date listed there is adjusted from the prior scheduled due date in the syllabus. So whereas the syllabus indicated that it would be due, let's see here, on Monday of week 13, the 4th of May, I've just adjusted it out to the following week, so 7 days later, to make sure that we have ample time and to kind of compensate for the disruptions happening during the semester. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little more time to work on it. Also, give us more time to develop the topics in the lectures. So it's due May 11th. That's the Monday of the last week of classes prior to finals week. So you'll turn it into me May 11th, Monday. That's 3 weeks from today. So you got 3 weeks to work on it, basically. And there's 3 optional prompts. So I'll just read for you guys these different prompts, if I can. All right, so here we go. Now you got 3 different possible topics to choose from. First of all, the format, which is written here at the top, it says you must write a 3 to 4 page essay, double-spaced, in 12-point font with normal margins on exactly one of these 3 prompts. So just make sure that you respect those format requirements. Keep the font at 12 points, do normal margins, don't expand the spacing or margins beyond the defaults when it's double-spaced, normal margins. It's 3 to 4 pages, but if you need a little more space than whatever, 4 pages, it's not a problem in my mind if you just go over. But if it's less than 3, especially with some of these heady topics, that's probably going to be a little bit insufficient. So like I said for the first essay, the upper boundary is flexible, but the lower boundary is a little more fixed. So try your best to, make sure that you meet that requirement too. It says no internet resources or assistance are permitted. So you're not supposed to use any outside materials, any outside sources, outside writings, or anything else. I want you to please pretend that you are writing this paper on a typewriter and you don't even know what electricity is, okay? So you just use books, physical books, and you write in your glorified electronic typewriter, but you're not web browsing, you're not going online, and you're not gonna find anything that any human being has ever said about this stuff except for me and this book and your own common sense. Now, when you use quotes, and you should probably include some quotes, that's always helpful to any essay. All I'm saying is put the quote in quote marks, and then at the end of the quoted passage, put the page number inside of parentheses. So that's it. That's the only citation requirement. Quote any quoted passages in quote marks, and put the page number at the end of the section with parentheses and closing it so I know where to find it in the book. No separate works cited or bibliography is needed, because since I'm limiting your materials to just a book, that would be kind of redundant to just say, here's the textbook information, which we all know. So you're encouraged and advised to put in a few quotes from time to time to strengthen your paper, but just put it in quote marks and give the page number, but it's not going to be any outside sources or anything else. It's due in class Monday, May 11th. It's 25% of your grade. So your first essay was 15, your midterm was 30, this is 25. So that brings us up to 70. And then the final exam is the last thing, obviously. We will get prepared for that a little later, closer to the end, but I'll distribute the study guide for it. And, just as we did with the midterm, we'll go over that study guide in our review sessions, in these live streams, and then you'll be ready to take the test on the last day, whatever the scheduled time and date is in the syllabus for our final. Okay, so there's 3 prompts, and the 3 topics are basically philosophy of mind, metaphysics of time, or epistemology, theory of knowledge. So you have these 3 basic options to think about if you want to write on one of them. Let me read to you the title or content here. Okay, so first one is about philosophy of mind, which is a subject that we're going to start on today and develop for a few weeks. Therefore, anybody considering the first prompt, yes, it's cumulative. Anybody considering the first prompt would probably want to delay, the work for it until we've had some of these lectures on the topic. But anyway, the first one, you're not going to be so familiar with the concepts that I'm mentioning in the prompt because we haven't gone over it in class yet. But anyway, bear with me. I'll read it for you. It says, monism/dualism. Explain the concept of dualism and monism, and then explain the concept of supervenience physicalism. So those are concepts that will be fully revealed this week: monism, dualism, supervenience. Okay, and then it says, you may refer to the works of Descartes, Stoljar, Smart, and Turing. And finally, state your own view of which thesis you prefer and why. So do you prefer, or do you think monism is the more plausible perspective, or dualism? So obviously you don't know yet exactly perhaps what these terms refer to, but hold on and we'll go over it this week. So that's one topic, philosophy of mind, in other words. The second one says time. Explain the way that Einstein changed the understanding of time with his theory of relativity. Using our assigned readings, class lectures, and video presentations, explain the idea of the relativity of simultaneity, the 3 ways that time is like space according to Ted Sider, and the way that space-time theory eliminates the idea that time moves. Finally, state whether you prefer Einstein's concept of time or the classical view that existed before him, and why. So that's another option. We've just kind of finished wrapping up with time. I have a few closing remarks today to sort of end that chapter of the book right now, or of our class. But that's another option. You could discuss the theory of relativity, the relativity of simultaneity shown in the lightning example. You'd go over Ted Sider's claim that the analysis of time moving leads us into puzzles and paradox, and then explain how it is that time is more like space in his analysis, in his paper. Okay, and then finally the third prompt is about knowledge. So that has to do with comparing that classical account of knowledge from the Greeks to the Gettier cases that basically show problems with it. And what it says here is this: explain the classical idea that knowledge can be defined by 3 separately necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. So if you write on this paper, you would basically have to start by talking about the classical definition of knowledge, and you'd have to examine each criteria. So what is truth? What is belief? What is justification? And then you have to say why it is that they are not enough for knowledge unless all 3 are present. So you basically would have to give like examples of cases where a person has satisfied maybe 2 out of the 3 conditions, but not the other one, and explain why intuition, common sense tells you that that would be a failure of knowledge. So you could also talk about Plato's dialogue, the Meno, and you could explain how Socrates thought that justification was key because it transformed a correct opinion into knowledge, and it added the stability like the rope metaphor indicates when he talked about those Daedalus statues. So you can go over all those topics and so on, and then you would talk about the Gettier cases, or at least one of them. After you provide the Gettier example, which demonstrates that you could have a justified true belief and not have knowledge, then you would close the paper by giving your own view of whether you thought the classical definition was correct in the first place, or whether these criticisms and Gettier examples show that that was the wrong definition of knowledge. Okay, so those are 3 different prompts. You would have to write on just one of the 3, whichever one you felt the most comfortable with, that you thought you could write the best paper about. And you have 3 weeks starting today to do it. Anybody who wanted any help or feedback on a draft or something, I'm always happy to help out if I can. So people will let me know if they have anything and they would like any kind of commentary in the days and weeks leading up to the due date. Like I said, I think with the first paper, in terms of style, in philosophy, you want to just kind of be straightforward and to the point. So it's okay to skip past a long-winded intro and to kind of cut short a long, rambling conclusion. The body paragraphs are really all that matters, so you can just get right to the topic in the prompt and start attacking the questions mentioned there in the prompt. And that's really about it. I don't know. If anyone had any other questions about the assignment, you could definitely ask at any time, either in these live streams or by email, or setting up a Skype call for anybody who wants to have a little bit more verbal interaction like that. But basically that's it. This is the second paper, and we've got 3 weeks to do it, and then after that it's just our final exam. So we're making progress through the semester. We're on schedule with the calendar of dates, but this is the next thing coming up. So anyway, letting you guys know about that next paper. Okay, and if you don't have questions now, and if they come up later in your mind, definitely let me know, and I'll take them as they come. So, all right, if that is good, then let's just close the door on our discussions of the philosophy of time and the metaphysics of time. So basically, I believe this. We were talking about David Lewis's article, right, on Friday, and his paper called The Paradoxes of Time Travel. And if I remember, what are time crimes? Oh, well, that's a film. Good. You know what, though? That makes me think of something, Marissa, so thank you for your reminder here. The prompt for essay 2 about time, it says in-class lectures, essays, and video presentations. Now, if we still had our face-to-face meetings, I would have actually shown the film Time Crimes. It's a movie. It's a time travel movie. So it's supposed to be kind of like a fun film couple of days in the class where we would think about the topic being analyzed philosophically, but through the medium of art and film. So Time Crimes is a great time travel independent film, Spanish film, with English subtitles. That's something that I was going to show, but we don't have face-to-face meetings, so I just took more time lecturing on the topics in these live streams. There's another video that is made by, I believe, Nova, called Physics of Light, and it was produced in South Korea, and I also sometimes will show that video. So anybody that wants to can find those if they'd like to expand on their understanding of these topics or get a little more, context. But I'm not requiring those things anymore. And in a way, I'd rather not have to force people to track them down, since everyone's access to these materials is going to be different. So since I can't just present them in a classroom to everybody, I'm kind of like striking them. So video presentations, don't worry too much. But if you ever have the time, and it's a fun movie for sure, Time Crimes. Okay, but returning to my quick statements about David Lewis. So David Lewis's paper, Paradoxes of Time Travel. Just a quick summary of what we did, and one last point. So he says in the paper, time travel is possible. It's not impossible. It's just weird. And the things about it that are weird are not actually logical impossibilities or contradictions. They're just bizarre. So for one, let's see, what was a couple of these paradoxes? How can two events be separated by two different amounts of time? Like if a person gets in a time machine, spends 5 minutes in it, but steps out and it's 10 years later, how much time was in between getting in and out? Was it 10 years or was it 5 minutes? To explain that away, he introduces the notion of two time frames, personal and external time. So personal time is the time experienced by the individual time traveler, as shown on the wristwatch, for example, and external time would be the time measured by all external observers and clocks. So those two things can be out of sync, and that would be one way of explaining away that possible paradox. Two people are, let me say it differently. If a person goes back in time and has a conversation with their previous self at an earlier date, you might think that's two people having a conversation, or is it one? Now that could be a paradox because it can't be both. David Lewis says the best answer is that it's actually one person, but it's two temporal parts of the one person. So that actually does not involve any contradiction, because according to the theory of space-time, we do have multiple different temporal parts, and if we traveled back in time, two of them would be located in space at the same moment. What else? What about the closed causal loops? Like if a person provided information to them past selves about how to build a time machine, and they used that to build a machine, took it into the past to deliver the message to their younger self, it seems kind of inscrutable where the information about building it came from in the first place. But he says those little loops could be just seen as bizarre, puzzling things, but no better or worse than like the idea that the universe has always existed, or that God, the creator of the universe, has no ultimate origin or explanation. So the last thing was this thing about Tim. Okay, let me bring you back into that little story. Tim wanted to kill his grandfather, so he wanted to go back in time to do it. But if he had succeeded, then that would have prevented his own birth at a later date. So it seems like on the one hand, he should be able to, but also that he should not be able to. And that could be seen as a paradox. Now, David Lewis, to break this paradox down and to show why it doesn't actually make the concept impossible, he says there's a little bit of an ambiguity with regard to the word can. Okay, so this is the last point I want to mention on this whole time stuff, and then we're moving into the next topic. When we talk about the word can, like what we can do, we sometimes mean it in different senses. So he says there's two senses of the word can. There's a narrow sense and a broad sense. Okay, so two senses of this one word, can. We've got what we call the narrow sense of the word. And then there's the broad sense. Not that one. Okay, so first of all, for the narrow sense. The narrow sense speaks about what one is able to do when we limit ourselves to a narrower range of facts. Okay, what one can do in the sense of a narrower range of facts. Let me see if I'm putting that the correct way. What one is able to do based on a narrower range of facts. Okay, and then the broad sense of the word can refers to what one is able to do based on a broader, more inclusive range of facts. So, okay, let me try and explain this distinction with a quick example. This is the sort of example that David Lewis used in the paper to explain this idea. So, if I just ask you guys watching this live stream, can you speak Russian? Sounds like it's a straightforward question. What would your answer be to that? Can you speak Russian? I wonder what you think. Just give me your answer. That should be easy enough, right? Can you speak Russian? Point blank. Direct question. What would be your common sense answer to a person giving you that question? Hey, yo, can you speak Russian? What do you say? Not at all. Okay. Now, Matthew, you're already getting into the sophisticated, nuanced reply, but we'll get to that, okay? So Lucas, Hugh, I see your answer. No, you can't, right? Marissa, maybe you studied a little bit, niet and all that, right? But anyway, let's just take the standard response that most would probably give in our, English-speaking society where it's not the most commonly learned second language. You probably would often just say, no, I can't, right? But now let me ask you the question in a slightly different way and see how maybe the answer is different. So let me ask you this one. If I compare you to a dog, can you speak Russian? Can you speak Russian compared to, let's say, an animal like a house pet, like a dog? Can you? And in that sense, what would you think? Well, it's kind of like what Matthew was saying, right? That if you take a look at the bigger picture, I guess you can speak Russian. In what sense? In the sense that you could acquire the language and that you have the intellectual capability to learn a second language if you really wanted to devote the time and study to it. So in that like sense, you can, but in a different sense, just considering your current abilities and knowledge, then you can't. Okay, so what do you think? In the narrower sense of the word can, would we say you can speak Russian? No, because we're just limiting ourselves to certain facts, like that you've never studied it yet, that it's not that you've learned the vocabulary and grammar of it. But when I ask, can you, in comparison to a dog or cat, then you would say, yes, I can. And now we're looking at the word can in the bigger picture sense, namely that we're considering a more inclusive set of facts, like, for example, just that you're a human being with a human intellect. And therefore, if we take a step back and look at that larger description of facts, then in that sense, yes, you can. Okay? It's just like me, right? My fastest mile I've ever run is 5 minutes, 25 seconds. But I like to tell myself that I can run a 5-minute mile. Maybe I can't do it right now because I'm not as perfectly well trained at peak training, but I think I can in the sense that I would be able to if I put in a really dedicated block of training and really focused on it. So anyways, going back to our question about Tim, the question was, can he kill his grandfather? And now Lewis says, the apparent paradox of saying it looks like, yeah, he can, but also no, he can't. Now we can explain this away by invoking the different senses of can. So when one says that he can kill his grandfather, they're applying the narrow interpretation of the word can, just considering what facts, that he's there, that he has the weapon, and that he has the intent to do it. Just looking and limiting yourself to that description of the facts, it would seem that he can. But according to what larger assessment of the situation does it seem like, no, he cannot, when we look at the bigger picture? Because in the bigger picture, not just viewing the fact that he's like looking through the rifle scope at the person, but when we look at the bigger picture that ultimately this individual did father the parent of this person who's traveled back in time, and given the fact that they ultimately were born, when we look at this bigger picture of the facts, it seems that no, he can't. So we kind of get to have it both ways. He can relative to a narrow interpretation of can, but he can't relative to a bigger picture, telescoping out assessment of the relevant facts. So here's where I want to end this discussion of time, because I think at the very end of all these lectures on it, someone could perhaps wonder, how does the relevance relate back to me in my everyday life? Because you might think, well, time travel is a purely theoretical concept. What application could this have to me? Well, here's where I think that kind of the relevance to you and the personal interest in it could come from. For example, you're watching this lecture right now. I know that if you're hearing me. So let me ask you a simple sounding question. Do you think that you could have not been watching this lecture this morning? Like, do you think it's possible that maybe you could have just failed to be viewing this right now? Is that something that you think could have happened, even though I know you're watching it? But do you think it's possible, at least, that you could have not watched it? Could you have missed this lecture? Okay, Eric, what you say is yes. Now, if the space-time theory is correct, okay, guys, what does that mean? That means that all moments of space-time are equally real, and they all exist, okay? Which means that it's not merely this present moment that is real, but also all of the future moments too, and all of the past ones. They're all just set out in the big space-time framework in the big block universe. So if all the moments exist, including every single moment of your future, then let me ask you this question again. Could you have missed this lecture? Now we're looking at a bigger picture, not just the fact that when you think about how you could have slept in or how you could have just chose to watch the replay at a different time, that's when we would say you could have missed it. But according to what bigger, more extensive set of facts might it seem that no, you couldn't have even missed this lecture? Well, when we just consider the fact that it's part of your timeline, that you are watching it now, it would seem then that this event was always included in the sequence of events in your overall space-time diagram. So therefore, just as much as this time traveler, you aren't able to do anything other than what you actually do. And so I feel like that is where the kind of bite of this whole analysis comes into greater focus for the individual. If the space-time theory is correct, then you're kind of locked in to a set pattern of unfolding events that is bound to occur because, in a sense, they already exist. Yes, it means you don't have free will, at least according to one way of thinking of free will, Melissa. If what you mean by free will is I'm free to do anything and I'm free to do things other than the actual actions, then no, that would not be possible. But if what you mean by free will is something a little bit less direct, like being able to think about the other options and stuff, or understand the reasons behind the actions that you do, I would say that's a free will of a kind. But no, it wouldn't be the robust sort of free will that involves doing things other, or the ability to do things other than the actual events that you do undergo. So I mean, you can't give me a counterexample to that. Like if you say, surely I could have not watched this lecture, you're not going to be able to prove that by actually not having watched the lecture, because whatever does occur to you is the only outcome. There's only one set of actual events. And so I find this interesting, right? Because in philosophy, a lot of times when possible worlds and stuff are raised in discussions of possibility, a student not as experienced in all this discussion will think, isn't this bizarre? I mean, there's no such thing as different possible worlds. There's just the actual world. But now when I'm telling you that you have no free will and that you can't do anything otherwise than what you actually do, your mind will start pondering the real possibilities of counterfactual behavior. So which one is it? Are possible worlds silly, or are they something that we should take seriously? On the one hand, people usually reject them as silly because they're purely hypothetical. But then when I tell you that hypothetical possibilities are closed off to your actual behavior, you start to think more seriously about how robust they actually are. So you'll never actually do anything counterfactual. You'll only do actual things. And the counterfactuals are merely mental. You're thinking right now about maybe having missed this lecture, but at the same time, you actually are watching it. So anyways, just some trippy kind of mind-bending elements having to do with all this analysis of space-time. And I did send you guys a little article in the popular venue Atlantic over the weekend, just as further stimulus for your thought on the subject. But I guess that's it. We've moved on from that. So that part of your destiny is complete, I guess. And we move into the next subject of the class. So we just have a couple left. Therefore, I'm going to erase this, and then we can go on and start talking about philosophy of mind. Okay. Okay, so I told you that we are moving on to another subject, and that's true. So now it's all about what we call philosophy of mind. Okay, so the philosophy of mind, another major subject area branch of philosophy. And in the philosophy of mind, the question is all about consciousness. What's up with consciousness, experience, perception? Is it something that can be merely explained on a physical basis? So you're a conscious being. You're a being that doesn't just sit there and occupy space like this eraser. You do occupy space, but also you're thinking and perceiving, feeling, hoping, dreaming, all those things, right? You have a mental inner life. And that's very unique and fascinating. Obviously, a lot of objects that we are walking around and interacting with all the time are just inanimate, non-living matter. But me and you, anyway, we have consciousness, we have thought, perception, experience. And therefore, philosophers, which are interested in every deep and fascinating question about life and the world, want to know about consciousness. Like, what is it? What's the basis of it? Is it purely physical? Or is there something about consciousness that cannot be analyzed or explained on a totally physical basis? So those are the kind of questions that we're now going to try and approach as we study the philosophy of mind. So what are some of the big questions here in the philosophy of mind? I'm just going to list a couple of them here to kind of stimulate our thought about this new subject. So big questions within the philosophy of mind. Are the mind and the brain two different things, or are they the same thing? That's one big question that we definitely are going to ask. Are the mind and the brain separate, or are they one and the same? Some people believe that the physical brain, like if there was no functioning brain, there wouldn't be consciousness. Other people, though, believe in what's called dualism. That's the idea that there's two different things going on. There's the physical brain, but then there's also this non-physical, somehow spirit or soul that inhabits the body, but it's not identical to it and could somehow exist or survive, even if the body was destroyed, as it's inevitably would be over time. So some people think the mind and the brain are distinct, that the mind is more like the soul, and the brain is somehow the physical organ of the body, but it's not the only thing that is responsible for consciousness. So we've got those two different perspectives on the table. Some people are thinking everything's physical. There's nothing about consciousness that's different from just a physical process, a biochemical, electrochemical process of the brain, neurons firing and neurotransmitters and synapses going off. Other people, though, think that it cannot be given a totally physical analysis, that there's something about consciousness that escapes a physical breakdown. Okay, another question is this. Could consciousness be explained physically? I mean, it's a related question, but I'll just put it here even though it's very similar. Can consciousness be explained physically or not? So, your thoughts, feelings, sensations, pleasure, pain, imagination, all the stuff that's going on in your mind at any given time, is that something that can be entirely reduced to physical processes of your physical brain? Some people think yes, some people think no. And one more question, I guess. I'll erase this so I can get a little room. We'll briefly touch on this as well. Could a machine ever think or have consciousness? Okay, so we're in a part of history where we're developing more and more powerful artificial intelligence. We have computers that optimize our everyday lives, that are sometimes chat bots or the Google Assistant. And over time, you wonder maybe, could we ever actually have machines that have been developed in such a way that they're capable of exhibiting consciousness like us? Is it possible for machines to think, or is that completely impossible? Is there something about consciousness that could never be reproduced in a purely physical structure of a computer? There are different opinions on that question too. Some people, and we'll read one, this is the creator of the digital computer, Alan Turing, way back in 1950, at like the infancy stages of computing technology. He did he wrote a famous paper that he argued eventually machines will be thinking things. Now, of course, not everyone would agree with his conclusion there, so we'll get to him and we'll see what the debate is all about, how people think, no, it's impossible for machines to think, compared against his argument that it actually is something that will happen and that it is not theoretically impossible for machines to have consciousness. So this is our next subject. It's all about the mind. It's all about thought, perception, feeling, consciousness, and what its ultimate basis is. Is it something physical or not? Now, there's two main positions in the philosophy of mind. And this is, of course, going to tie into that paper prompt that I just talked to you guys about at the beginning today. So I'll erase here, and then I'm going to talk to you guys about these two major positions in the philosophy of mind. Okay, we've got two main positions in the philosophy of mind. So as we've learned in philosophy, there's always people that hold, different incompatible positions. In philosophy of religion, some people are theists, some people are atheists, right? In ethics, some people are utilitarians and some people are Kantians. In epistemology, some people believe in the classical theory of knowledge, other people criticize it like Gettier. And when it came to metaphysics of time, we had ideas like from Newton that time and space were independent and that time moves. But then you have Einstein in the space-time theory saying, no, that's not correct. And instead, it doesn't move at all, and it's integrated with space. So in this unit of philosophy, there are also powerful disagreements, and we're going to explore some of those. So starting with these two main positions in the philosophy of mind. Okay, so some people are what we call monists. And then other people are called dualists. So monism in the philosophy of mind. Actually here, monist is not the way I want to put it, because monist is like the noun for an adherent to the philosophy, like Buddhist. But I want to tell you about the term for the philosophy itself, like Buddhism. So this is monism. And then dualism. Okay? Small correction. Okay? So what about monism? The position of monism says that everything in the universe is made out of only one kind of substance. Okay, so everything, not just some things, but 100% of all things, they're all made out of the same stuff. Okay, so everything in the universe is literally built out of only one kind of substance. All right, so monism, the prefix mono, that refers to just something being one. Like monogamy is one partner. Or if you had mono speakers, then that's only one audio channel. Or monologue is like a person giving a soliloquy on stage and it's just one person. So, monism refers to one. And built into the definition is that idea. So it says everything in the universe is made out of only one kind of substance, okay? Now, in dualism, that's a different perspective. They say that everything in the universe is made out of two different kinds of substances. So I'll put that here. Okay, now I want to tell you guys a little bit about these different substances that are claimed to make everything by either of these two theories. Okay, so monism says how many substances make everything? One. And dualism says how many substances are there that jointly constitute everything? It's two. But what are these two candidate substances that are being referred to in the different theories? Okay, so substances. So one of them is physical matter. Okay? And the other one is called mind. Mind and matter. Physical matter is defined as follows. It's just anything that occupies space. So it's anything that is extended in space. And who remembers, what is the most fundamental unit of physical matter? At least conventionally, we usually use this term to refer to it. So you break matter down into smaller and smaller bits, and when you get to the least element, what do they call that again? Matter in its most minimal configuration, otherwise known as what? The stuff. The little like Lego building blocks of reality. Let's go with atoms. Yeah, elementary particle, I know, might be a more precise term because there are sometimes subatomic particles that people speak of. But since this is not a real like physics class, we'll just take it at the level of informal description, atoms. So I'm going to put that in parentheses over there just so you get a sense that that's another way we might define what this stuff is. So atoms. Okay, so that's one type of substance, physical matter. Anything that is extended in space, and so in essence, just anything that's made out of atoms. All the stuff in the universe, according to monism, is made out of just one kind of substance. And one type of monism is called physicalism. Okay? So the other type of substance, which is claimed to perhaps exist, and by dualists, it's the other one that does exist, that's the mind. Now, the mind is defined as such. It is something that has no extension in space and is thinking. So not extended in space and thinks. So that's what mind is thought to be. Now, when we use the term mind in philosophy, it should not be confused with the physical brain. Physical brain is a material object that is made out of atoms. You could take its weight, its volume, it displaces water, it's physically encased in your skull, and so there's the brain. The mind, though, is thought of as something more along the lines of like your soul, right? It's like the ghost in this body, if you will, that inhabits your body for the time during which you are alive as a human being. So mind is not at all physical. It's not extended in space. It's not like something that's tiny, 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 and you would see it under a microscope. It's something that's not extended in physical space at all. So literally, it's nowhere in terms of its physical position because it's not got any extension. So it's an immaterial thinking thing. It's a formless, non-material essence of a thing that is capable of having thought. Okay? Now, we say monism claims that everything in the universe is made out of only one kind of substance. And since there are these two different eligible substances of reality, there are actually two types of monism. Okay? So two types of monism. One of them is called physicalism. Okay, and then the other type of monism is called idealism. So physicalist monism says that everything in the universe is made out of physical matter. So keep the breakdown in your mind logically structured. Monism is just the overall idea that everything in this whole universe is made out of just one kind of thing. But then depending on what that one type of substance actually is claimed to be, a person can take their pick and be either a physicalist monist or an idealist monist. So physicalists say that everything is made out of the matter, the first kind of substance. So that's the view. Everything in the universe is made out of physical matter, including us and our consciousness. Everything in the universe is made out of physical matter. Just going to create a little more space down here so that we can easily write that down. So what I'm writing is this statement. Everything in the universe is made out of physical matter, including us. And that's the key distinctive feature of this type of monism, including us and our consciousness. Okay, so that's physicalist monism. It's the viewpoint that 100% of all things is made out of matter. Basically, everything's made out of atoms. And it's not limited to just tables and chairs and non-living material. It's also all the way through every living system. So even the mind is really just the brain, according to physicalism. There's nothing other than the brain when it comes to consciousness. So if you're a physicalist, then you're not going to believe in anything supernatural or spiritual. You would just think that consciousness is a byproduct of the physical operations of the brain and its neurochemistry. And if there were no functioning brain, then there would be no consciousness. In physicalism, the idea of a disembodied consciousness that somehow floats free from a body would not be possible to exist, because the only way that consciousness does exist, according to this viewpoint, is when the brain is up and running as it ought to. So physicalism says everything's physical. So are you. Even your mind and the thoughts and feelings and so on that you have inside are just physical phenomena created by the workings of the brain. Okay, so that's one type of monism. The other type is called idealism. So let me put that here. See physicalism and the definition. You can always go back to see it in the replay if you want to check the notes again. The other type of monism is idealism. And according to idealism, everything in the universe is made out of the mind. So everything is made out of ideas. Now, idealism, I'm just going to tell you, is not the most popular perspective anymore in, the 21st century, 2020. It, to most people, I think, sounds a little bit far-fetched, because what it says is that there's no physical matter at all. Like this table and chair and every object around you, they're really just thoughts. They're all just ideas that are being had by the mind. And so they don't have their own independent physical material reality. This, I don't think, with all the great advances that we've made in physics, is the most widespread view anymore. There is a Christian philosopher named George Berkeley, who was a bishop in the church in the 17 or 1800s, and he was a famous proponent of this idea. But most people today don't take it too seriously. I'm just mentioning it so that you get the full menu of options in your mind. Some people that are monists are physicalists. A slight minority of them are idealists. But I'll put a little asterisk next to physicalist monism, because that's the one that we're going to spend more time talking about. So really our class discussions moving forward for the next couple meetings are going to be all about the debate and contrast between physicalist monism and dualism. Dualism says both of these substances make everything up. So if you're a dualist, then you would claim that not everything is made out of matter, not everything is made out of mind, but that there's a mix, that a lot of things are made out of matter, like your body and the physical objects that have mass. But then there's also the mind, which is not made out of matter, which is immaterial, and which can exist without the physical body that it somehow is connected with for a moment. So dualism is what we're going to pretty much set against physicalism. But just so that you do understand, there's one other possible version of monism, and that's idealism. Now, you might be thinking, if idealism is true, then what happens to stuff when I'm not looking at it? Like the pyramids right now, or the Eiffel Tower, you're not witnessing them, you're not in the space where they are at. And so if there's nothing besides ideas, then do they stop existing when there's no observer? We got a quarantine right now, maybe no one's out there looking at the Eiffel. Does that mean it stops existing? Let me just tell you, the most sophisticated versions of idealism say that the objects do remain in the world, in the universe, when no one's perceiving them, because God is the ultimate perceiver, and he keeps thinking about them even when no individual is out there examining them or perceiving them directly. So God suspends into reality all the things that we think exist by having ideas of them. So in idealism, sophisticated versions of it, the independent reality of objects is secured by the fact that God is just thinking of them. But God, if he wanted to cause anything to stop existing, could just stop thinking about it and it would disappear. So that's idealism. But again, I just mentioned it in passing. We're probably not going to mention it again after this, but we're just setting all our definitions and concepts on the table to get ourselves started. So that's the first look, everybody, at philosophy of mind. We're going to continue through those notes. So I have Descartes to talk to you guys about on Wednesday. So read the Descartes' sixth meditation assigned in the syllabus. Try to get through the work of Daniel Stoljar also, and we'll try our best to cover Descartes and Stoljar in the next couple meetings. So today what I've just taught you is that there's another topic in philosophy of mind, all about consciousness and perception and thought. And questions concern whether those things are just physical or whether there's something more than physical. Could machines even ever think or not? Why not or why? Main positions in the philosophy of mind are monism and dualism. Monism says there's just one type of substance. Dualism says there's two. What are the substances being referred to? Well, there's mind and there's matter. Mind is something that has no physical extension, but a thinking, like a soul. And matter is just something that's anything extended, and ultimately it's atoms. So monists that are physicalists believe everything's made out of matter, including the brain and the consciousness that it has. Idealists that are monists think everything's just made out of thought and consciousness, and there's no matter at all. And dualists believe that there's both. So we're going to expand on our debate between physicalism and dualism next time. But anyway, guys, thanks so much for being here this morning. I'm going to let you go for now. But have a great day. Stay safe. And we'll be in touch. If you need anything, let me know, okay? Have a great day. Miss everybody, but we'll be doing fine over time, okay? Thank you, guys. Have a good one.